And today we'll be looking at universal design in education, so encompassing UDL as well, and looking at specifically a digital focus. So in this webinar then we'll begin with an introduction to the centre and also to universal design. We'll move on then to universal design in education and see how it takes a whole systems human ecological approach. After that, then we'll look at the 7 principles of universal design and look at how each can be applied to digital learning environments. We'll then look at UDE across Europe and note the position on all students learning together. And then towards the end, we'll look at tools and resources. So we'll look at various resources for best practice, including for communication, web accessibility, and co-design. There will be an opportunity at the end as well for questions and answers. So to begin then with an introduction to the Centre for Excellence in Universal Design. We're dedicated to enabling the design of the built and the digital environments, including services and systems, that can be accessed, understood, and used regardless of a person's age, size, ability, or disability. We're based in Ireland and we're part of the National Disability Authority, or the NDA. And our work centres on these 4 key pillars: education, digital, products and services, and the built environment. Universal design, or UD, it may also be called design for all or inclusive design. And it's the design and the composition of an environment so that it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people, regardless of their age, size, ability, or their disability. It's also important to note that this is without the need for adaptation, so no need for assistive devices or specialized solutions. As every design decision has the potential to either include or exclude people, we recognize that good design enables while bad design disables. The World Health Organization reports that there's a lot of focus placed on special supports rather than inclusion and equity. And so a paradigm shift is needed, moving from just accessibility towards universal design. The key differences then between universal design and accessible design is that while accessibility provides basic access and usability of facilities, products, and services for people with disabilities, universal design aims to create products and services that are usable by as many people as possible to the greatest extent possible and without needing adaptation. Universal design enables independence and social participation for all through continual improvement. And at its best, then, universal design is invisible. So taking a universal design approach then solves for one but extends to many. And what we mean by this is that universal design assumes that everyone experiences barriers or reduced functioning or some form of disability, whether that is permanent, temporary, or situational, at some stage in their lives. So a benefit of universal design then is that if you design for someone with a disability, your design will automatically include this wider range of people. And for example, in this illustration from Microsoft, we see someone with one arm, another person with temporary arm injury, and another person carrying a baby. So by designing for that person with one arm, these other people will also benefit. Similarly, in this example, we might imagine how designing for a deaf person or a person with hearing loss, that would also benefit someone with an ear infection, as well as maybe a bartender working in a noisy pub. So a solution in that instance might be using a visual alarm as opposed to one that solely relies on audio signals or captions on a screen and clear sightlines in the building as well. And maybe you can think of other examples of design features that benefit this wider range of people. Looking at the extremes then, so in order to meet the needs of this widest range of users, we need to prioritize users with the more diverse abilities and characteristics. When conducting user research and user testing then, it's really important to oversample the tails of this distribution curve, and that would ensure inclusion of those with the edge case experiences. A quote from an education consultant speaker, Larry McMahon here, is that using this method helps us to think about the world not from the standpoint of the average or supposedly normal user, but from the extremes. So why should we design for everyone? Well, over 1 billion people worldwide have some form of disability. The number of older people as well in Western countries is steadily increasing. And looking at this from a business point of view, most companies don't consider these market segments. So this could result in a loss of market of nearly 20%. Another reason to design for everyone is the European Accessibility Act, or the EAA. And this is an EU directive that introduced mandatory accessibility requirements for certain products and services across the EU. It's applicable to both the public and the private sectors, and it came into effect across the EU in June of this year. Its aims are to increase the availability of accessible products and services across the EU, and also to ensure that accessibility requirements are consistently applied to the manufacturing and sale of certain products and services. Its relevance for digital education then includes setting standards for learning technologies, for online platforms, apps, computers, smartphones, and so on. So this is a quotation from the book Normal Sucks: How to Live, Learn and Thrive Outside the Lines by Jonathan Mooney. Reflecting on his own experience of dyslexia, he states, "What do we miss about ourselves and about others when we make a difference to the problem? Everything, I think." And this brings us to the next section, which is to take a closer look at universal design in education, or UDE. So the CUD promotes universal design in education through a whole systems approach so that physical and digital learning environments, educational services, teaching and learning can be easily accessed, understood, and used by the widest possible range of learners and by all key stakeholders. This includes the promotion of universal design as subject matter in curricula and assessment as well. Universal design in education has the potential to transform the education system to be an equitable and inclusive environment. And a phrase we like here at the centre is, "It's normal to be different." And this is a statement that challenges those common perceptions where difference is exceptional. A universal design approach is also seen in the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, or the UNCRPD, and in particular in Article 4 and in Article 24. In Article 4, universal design is explicitly addressed, and it states that state parties undertake or promote research and development of universally designed goods, services, equipment, and facilities, which should require the minimum possible adaptation and the least cost to meet the specific needs of a person with disabilities, to promote their availability and use, and to promote universal design in the development of standards and guidelines. Article 24 recognises the rights of persons with disabilities to education, with measures provided for academic and for social development to facilitate their full and equal participation in education and as members of the community. And then Article 24 also speaks to the importance of staff training. So it highlights the need to employ teachers, including teachers with disabilities who are qualified in sign language and Braille perhaps, and to train staff who work at all levels of education. This training would include disability awareness, the use of alternative means of communication, educational techniques and materials. So what then does universal design in education entail? As we've seen then, UDE follows a whole systems human ecological approach. It looks at the whole educational environment, so across all levels and educational institutions, and includes the local community or wider public. It seeks to create learning-friendly environments which are fully accessible and where everyone feels safe, supported, stimulated, and able to express themselves. And it considers the whole person, whereby the capacity of every person to learn is recognized, and high expectations are placed for all learners, including those with disabilities. The human ecological approach then recognizes also the many layers of our environment which influence our development. And 3 layers or levels are outlined here, and they are the macro, meso, and micro. Looking at the first one, the macro level, this is about the establishment of policies and legislation, developing standards, and promoting awareness, ensuring its adoption at national and local educational system levels. The meso level, then, the middle one, is the level of the institution. And this includes governance as well as family and community-based initiatives. And these are vital for growing and sustaining innovative, inclusive learning. The last one then is the micro level, and this is the level of the individual. So this level is concerned with individual needs and abilities, and this might be through teaching practices, classroom design, curricula, assessment, and technologies. It could also include having a designated person who would be continuous throughout, and this person would work with students and teachers to review and gather feedback. So upholding this whole systems approach are 4 pillars. First is learning, teaching, curricula, and assessment. Then the next one is student supports, services, and social engagement. And then the physical and the digital environments. So looking to the first one, pillar 1, learning, teaching, curricula, and assessment. Here, the focus is on reducing barriers to learning by building more flexibility, accessibility, clarity, learner voice, and choice into how programs are designed and delivered. Here, you might recognize Universal Design for Learning, or UDL, as this is the primary framework looking at flexibility and multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression as per CAST. In Pillar 2, student supports, services, and social engagement, we start to begin to look outside of the classroom, and the goal here is to reduce barriers to student success by ensuring student services and those extracurricular activities are flexible and accessible for all learners. The third pillar, the physical environment, the goal here is to reduce barriers in the physical environment by ensuring that they are accessible, welcoming, and sensory aware spaces that support flexible use. And then the last pillar is pillar 4, the digital environment. The goal here is to reduce barriers to digital engagement by ensuring digital platforms and materials are accessible, that they're easily navigated and understood by all. So as universal design for learning focuses on learning, teaching, curricula, and assessment, we can see then how universal design in education encompasses universal design for learning. Based on universal design, then just looking at universal design for learning, the principles of UDL provide a framework to ensure multiple means of engagement, so to tap into learners' needs, offer appropriate challenges, and increase motivation. You could also offer flexible learning spaces that can be used for individual or group work, so such as quiet rooms, movable furniture, or providing different seating options. The next is multiple means of representation, so giving learners various ways of acquiring information and knowledge, and this could be through text, video, audio, or visual options. Also, multiple means of action and expression, so giving learners alternatives for demonstrating what they know, such as through a continuous assessment instead of an end-of-term exam, through an essay, a poster, a presentation, or a podcast. So universal design in education is emphasised in the EASPD Lisbon Declaration 2021 too, which states that all persons with disabilities have the right to equal opportunities and high quality appropriate action for education to maximise their potential and to participate in and contribute fully to an inclusive society. They have the right to choose and receive education in an inclusive environment. They have the right to appropriate resources and expertise to meet their educational, social, and health-related needs, and they have the right to access to quality services. In Ireland, there are 2 supports are the ADEDU Charter and University for All, the Unlocking Inclusion Toolkit. The ADEDU Charter is a vehicle for institutions to declare their intent to make incremental and sustainable progress towards embedding a universal design approach. The Unlocking Inclusion Toolkit is developed by University College Dublin, and it's a practical support which accompanies the implementation of the ADEDU Charter. It provides key guidance, self-assessment tools, and case study examples of good practice in action. And you can find both at the link at the bottom of the slide. And just to say that we can provide the slides or the links at the end of this as well, or during the week. So there's also a call to action, a call to make them curriculum more inclusive. this is increasingly being heard. And the UNESCO International Bureau of Education states that an inclusive curriculum takes into consideration and caters for the diverse needs, previous experiences, interests, and personal characteristics of all learners. It attempts to ensure that all students are part of the shared learning experiences of the classroom and that equal opportunities are provided regardless of learner differences. And then similarly, the Nicosia Declaration 2025, which was presented at the AAATE conference in Cyprus last September, titled From Margins to Mainstream, Integrating Accessibility and Universal Design Across Higher Education Curricula. This makes a call for immediate, coordinated and structural action by all relevant stakeholders to integrate accessibility, universal design and assistive technology as core elements of higher educational policy, curriculum design, institutional governance, and quality assurance mechanisms. Regarding inclusive assessment, then, Quality and Qualifications Ireland declared the need for imaginative and forward-looking approaches to assessment to keep up with the number and diversity of students and evolving expectations, such as giving students more choice in how they are assessed. They also assert that the customary end of semester 2 to 3 hour written exam is under the magnifying glass now. The current educational policy landscape in Ireland is outlined in the CEUD paper titled Universal Design in Education and Training, Policy Landscape in Ireland. This paper describes the whole systems approach that we spoke about and is available on our website as well. Central then to the universal design and education approach is co-design. The big idea is an exemplary co-designing initiative that empowers young people to think creatively and solve real-world problems. It connects young people with industry as well. So these provide students with real-world learning experiences at scale, connecting industry and education and igniting young minds. A quotation from a student participant highlights the value of this collaborative co-design. My favorite part was working in a team and collaborating with each other as we all have different ideas but work well together. And that's available, or you can find out more on thebigidea.ie. Also, the power of design. So this is another initiative to teach students the value of design in everyday life. It's a collaboration with Junior Achievement Ireland and Dublin City Council, and it uses a learning by doing methodology to demonstrate to primary and secondary level students the positive impact of design on social, cultural, and economic life. It was initiated in 2015 and since then has had more than 3,000 students. So moving on to section 3, in this section we'll look at the 7 universal design principles and see how they might apply to the digital classroom. So here are the 7 principles, and each of these has a number of related guidelines. These are, both the principles and the guidelines are really useful to ensure that your course is usable by the greatest number of people possible. And the principles are equitable use, flexible use, simple and intuitive use, perceptible information, tolerance for error, low physical effort, and size and space for use. So now we'll go into each of these and explore how they apply to education. The first principle is equitable use, and this means that the design is usable by people with diverse abilities. It includes information, products and services in formats accessible for a broad range of abilities. An example of equitable use in digital learning environments is accessible course platforms. So it's a good idea to ensure that the learning management system, the LMS, is compatible with screen readers, keyboard navigation, captions, and so on. Also, adding captions to recorded lectures. So these benefit not only deaf students or students with hearing loss, but also anyone revising in a noisy area, so illustrating the benefits of the universal design approach. By contrast, then, in this photo, we see a lecture theatre with a traditional layout. We can see that there's poor visibility of the screen and of the board. There are steps to both the seating and the stage area, and there's no alternative seating options that we can tell from this photo anyway. So moving on to principle 2, flexible use. This means that the design accommodates a wide range of individual preferences and abilities. For instance, it provides a choice to read or to listen, or access a textbook or an exam paper through a digital recording of it. An example of flexible use in digital learning environments then is multiple means of engagement by offering reading, podcasts, and short videos on the same topic so that learners can choose how they want to engage. Also, flexible assessment formats to allow students to present learning as an essay, a video, or infographic, depending on their individual strengths and requirements. Principle 3 is simple and intuitive use, and this means that the use of the design is easy to understand regardless of the user's experience, their knowledge, their language skills, or their current concentration level. An example of this principle for education is ensuring that navigation is clear by using simple course menus, for instance, and by using consistent icons and intuitive layouts to ensure that the most important information is easy to find. Also, by using plain language, so using simple, clear words and phrases in instructions, lessons, assignment briefs, and all communication with students. Moving on to principle 4, perceptible information. This means that the design communicates necessary information effectively to the learner, regardless of ambient conditions or the learner's sensory abilities. And good practice here would involve using a variety of modes, such as pictorial, verbal, or tactile, and providing adequate contrast and maximizing the legibility of essential information. Some examples of this principle for digital learning environments include adding captions and transcripts to multimedia. For instance, include closed captions to videos. Closed captions are those captions that can be turned on and off, as opposed to open captions, which can't be turned off. Transcripts also are a text version of the video or audio content, while descriptive transcripts include that text version of the video's audio narration, that is, what the person is saying in the video, as well as a description of its visual elements. Also, ensure all visual elements are described with text. So, for instance, alt text added to images, and any infographics and charts are clearly labeled, and color alone isn't used to convey information. So the fifth principle is tolerance for error, and this means that the design minimizes hazards and the adverse consequences of unintended actions. It could do this by providing clear instructions, offering accessible navigation, and incorporating error checking features into assignments. An example of this for UDE would be having an undo button. And this would give the students the option to undo an action, thereby reducing any unnecessary anxiety. Also incorporating autosave features, so when students are submitting an assignment or completing a quiz. The sixth principle of universal design is low physical effort. This means that the design can be used efficiently and comfortably with minimum fatigue. And it includes creating learning environments, materials, and tasks that are physically easy for all students to engage with, ensuring physical accessibility and reducing unnecessary exertion. A UDE example here would be the use of voice commands, which could be used to navigate the LMS, for instance. Also, speech to text could be used for essay writing and for participating in discussions. And similarly, having automatic or power-assisted doors into the building. And then finally, principle 7. So this relates to size and space. For this, appropriate size and space is provided for approach, reach, manipulation, and use, regardless of the user's body size, posture, or mobility. This might seem more relevant to physical classrooms, but it's an important consideration for digital environments as well. But looking first at physical learning environments, the size and space principle means having accessible physical learning spaces. And for this, you'd consider lighting, heating, and acoustics for assistive devices and for personal assistance. Ensure comfortable reach to all components for all users, whether they're seated or standing, left or right-handed, provide adjustable desks and accessible equipment, and ensure aisles are wide and provide options for seating. Applying this principle to digital learning environments, you could ensure that interface elements, such as buttons, are large enough for students with limited fine motor skills to select easily. Ensure compatibility with assistive technology, and build and test for responsive design for mobile and desktop users. So moving on to section 4, let's take a look now at UDE across Europe. The vision for inclusive education systems, this is outlined by the European Agency for Special Needs and Inclusive Education, is that all learners have access to meaningful, high-quality educational opportunities in their local community alongside their peers and friends. Partnerships and networks with stakeholders and local communities then are increasingly important. And this cross-sectoral working needs to include an understanding of the wider ecosystem that we talked about for inclusive educational systems. So how can we achieve inclusive education? Firstly, looking at legislation, new laws need to ensure that every learner's right to an inclusive and equitable education. Next, policies should promote inclusive education as an approach for improving educational opportunities for everyone. And finally, practices should be equitable, effective, and efficient. Through these approaches, we can do a number of things. Firstly, we can build on the learner's individual talents and respond to their needs. We can engage stakeholders and enable them to contribute to inclusive education. We can develop attitudes, beliefs, knowledge, skills, and behavior that support inclusion. We can improve structures and processes over time. We can personalize teaching to engage all learners and support active participation. And we can provide flexible resources for all stakeholders. So ultimately, inclusive education systems then change lives and they improve societies. There's a lot of interest in AI in education and its use and impact for inclusion as well. So to speak briefly about this, I'll refer to the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, or SWOT analysis in the Centre's paper that's titled AI and Disability Inclusion in Ireland, Opportunities and Challenges. And in this paper, education is a key sector. Some strengths of AI that were identified in the paper include personalized learning. So as AI can tailor educational experiences to meet the specific needs of students with disabilities, thereby providing customized learning pathways. Another strength is accessible educational materials. AI can convert text, images, and video to speech and automated subtitles. AI can help create virtual classrooms too that can accommodate various disabilities, offering flexible learning environments. Some weaknesses then include a possible digital divide. So access to educational AI tools may be limited due to a lack of diverse modes for inputting queries, which can disproportionately affect students with disabilities. Also, data privacy. So all data collected for personalized learning needs to be handled carefully with strict privacy safeguards to protect students' sensitive information. AI systems, though, might require the learner to state their disability, so that increases the data privacy burden. Some opportunities that were identified in the paper include enhanced learning outcomes. So by providing customized learning pathways, AI can help improve educational outcomes for students with disabilities, thereby ensuring that they receive the support that they require. Also, innovative teaching methods. AI can introduce new teaching methods and tools that make learning more engaging and effective for all learners, especially those with disabilities. Some possible threats then include the exclusion from advanced tools. Here, students with disabilities may face exclusion from the benefits of AI-driven educational tools due to their high costs and also limited accessibility features. Also, a technology dependence, so an over-reliance on AI tools could lead to and neglect of traditional teaching methods, and also of personal interaction, both of which are crucial for comprehensive education. And then finally, privacy risks. Excuse me. Mishandling the sensitive data related to disabilities can lead to privacy breaches and misuse of information, causing harm potentially to students and their families. So, how might we future-proof learning environments? The Economic and Social Research Institute here explores this in relation to post-primary schools, and they identify the current acceptable use policy, or AUP, documents. And these AUPs traditionally cover internet and device use in order to provide a safe and controlled learning environment. However, as technology has advanced, so too have the expectations and demands on these AUP documents. So this paper, Future-Proofing Schools, assesses the readiness of the current AUPs to address AI, and it also outlines potential risks and benefits for post-primary schools. And you can read the paper at the link here that'll be provided later. To support educators with online and e-learning courses, Athena's e-learning hub is a really useful resource. It offers, Athena offers an e-learning hub to support lecturers with the creation, testing, and implementation of cooperative, transformative, and inclusive learning environments. Athena is providing a universal online educational resource and toolkit that includes a pedagogic model of digital learning and also a prototype of digital learning solution. There are 3 relevant Athena ebooks. The first is State of Art in Digital Education, then Design Thinking for Digital Learning, and Digital Pedagogical Model. And you can learn more about that at athenadigitалuniversity.eu. So on to section 5, and here we'll look at the tools and resources. The accessibility of a digital learning environment relies on 3 key elements: the accessibility of the online platform or learning environment, the accessibility of the content that is shared during the session, and also the accessibility awareness of the educator and the students in the class. In this section, we'll look at some practical tools that approach accessibility and universal design from each of these perspectives. So firstly, looking at digital environments, excuse me, a learning management system, or LMS, is a digital application used to create, deliver, manage, and track online learning and training programs. Some popular LMSs include Moodle, Canvas, Blackboard, and Google Classroom. So when selecting an LMS, it's really important to take a UDE approach by considering that whole system that we looked at, including the learner's physical as well as their digital environment, assessment, supports, and social engagement. It's also really important to ensure that the LMS is compatible with screen readers, that learners can navigate using only their keyboard, that the LMS is user-friendly with clear navigation, and that it allows for good color contrast. Clear communication is key for ensuring that content is accessible. And a really useful resource to support clear communication is the Customer Communications Toolkit for Services to the Public. This is a government publication in collaboration with the CEUD, and it's informed by standards, design guidance, and international best practice. And it looks at 3 areas of communication: written communications, spoken and signed, and digital communication. It's available on the CEUD website and also through the QR code on this screen, and I'd really recommend checking that out. As this webinar is centered on digital learning environments, you may find the digital section of this toolkit especially helpful. It provides guidance on written text, document design, accessible links, and micro-content. So micro-content being email subject lines, GIFs, and headlines. Also multimedia, images and color, and also on the web content accessibility guidelines. Alongside the communications toolkit, the Centre's web accessibility techniques are also really useful, and these provide comprehensive advice on web and mobile app accessibility. and include code snippets and cross-references to the WCAG 2.1 and also to the European standard EN 301549. It includes advice for designers, content providers, and editors and developers. And you can find that on our website as well. As co-designing and collaboration are so central to the universal design in education approach, this webinar here is also a really useful resource as it outlines how to establish a culture of co-design. The webinar was held by the CEUD, Design SkillNet, and the Institute of Designers in Ireland in November 2021. The premise of the webinar is that all people are creative and they can all participate in co-designing their own educational experience. To foster inclusion, then, collaboration is key. This is a central tenet of universal design for education, empowering student participation in the process of all learning. And to quote from the recent Accessible EU European event in Cyprus, awareness is the seed, but collaboration is the growth. Likewise, consultation with people with disabilities is essential, as through this you can often uncover exclusionary practices that had been overlooked. Article 4 of the UNCRPD, as we saw, requires all government departments and statutory agencies to ensure the effective participation of people with disabilities in the creation and implementation of policies and legislation that impact their lives. To this end, then, the NDA developed Participation Matters. These are guidelines on implementing this obligation to meaningfully engage with disabled people. A key part of this is ensuring that all communication and interactions are facilitated through alternative and accessible formats. You can find that on our website as well, and it's also available on this link, which will be provided later. Looking now at the built environment, the CEUD's Building for Everyone, a Universal Design Approach, is a series of 10 booklets that provide guidance on how to design, build, and manage buildings and spaces so that they can be readily accessed and used by everyone, regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability. And these guidelines are a really good resource for understanding the potential barriers to accessing the physical learning environment, and also for appreciating various learner requirements. It's available on our website and will be shared as well later. So I'll close now with this quotation by Ken Robinson from his book Creative Schools, which I thought was fitting for both digital and physical learning environments. And he says, "A vibrant school can nourish an entire community by becoming a source of hope and creative energy." And then just a note on how, if you want to get in touch with the Centre, you can find out more about us at our website, which is www.universaldesign.ie. We're also on LinkedIn and on Blue Sky as well. So now I'll just open up to any questions or comments. If you have any, just feel free to share, and I'll do my best to answer them.
If anyone wants, they can also write questions in the chat and I can read them out. I see some claps from Georgios and Nicole. That's always good feedback. All right. Maybe something you have done extensive research and there is a lot of material out there. What kind of impact have you seen, Rachel, in schools, like implementing this?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So we do seem to be getting more engagement with UDE. So there's a lot of information currently about UDL. So we're kind of shifting that towards looking at the wider school environment and that whole systems approach. So some of those initiatives that I just briefly talked about here that I really recommend looking more into are the Big Idea and JAI. So JAI in particular, that is the Junior Achievement Ireland. It's the Irish branch of the wider, the Global Junior Achievement. And what they have done is, or what we've done with them is organize a workshop called The Power of Design. And this is a workshop that the students take part in to really understand how design can include. And it's a really nice project. The students get so much out of it. And so it's projects like these that schools are slowly taking a bit of more interest in, um, that we're kind of seeing a little bit of an uptake in, but it's still kind of getting the message out there, getting what is universal design and also differentiating it from inclusive design. So it's not just kind of providing for people specifically with disabilities, but for everyone.
And teachers, they play a very big role in this. Do you see
Absolutely, yes.
like rigidity? Do you see they're open to adapting?
I think they want to, yeah, for sure. Like they want to, most teachers do want to have an inclusive environment. It's just maybe the training, the time, these kind of practical pressures that they have. So that is like it's a challenge that we need to work with. How do they design multiple formats for the same lesson? So it is a time pressure, but I think AI could be a good solution or a tool in that case.
Yeah,
And
because
I think it's a
teachers,
cultural shift. Sorry.
sorry. Yeah, no, go on.
I think we need like a cultural shift as well. So it's not just seen as this extra thing we need to do, but a core part of the work of educators and stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. As I was saying before, because teachers often don't have time, they do complain about this a lot. So
Hmm.
maybe AI can be a solution. I see some questions in the chat. Costanza, maybe you can introduce yourself and ask your question.
Sure. So I'm Costanza working in all digital, and I would like to ask if you observe, there are any concrete disparities across the different education system of the European countries. If there are some countries implementing OLD better than others, and how coherent exactly is the implementation in Europe, in the EU? Yeah.
Yeah, there's some really good practice examples across Europe, in particular Italy and Portugal. Finland and Norway as well have looked or have incorporated universal design. So I can provide some links maybe to provide more information on those, but they provide really good practice examples. There is a little bit disparity globally, but I think Europe seems to be looking more um, at inclusive classrooms. So rather than having the dual system approach, the separating supposedly special classes from the mainstream, the move as outlined by the EASNIE suggests that best practice is, or that the common more common consensus is that learners learn best learning together, essentially. So the having inclusive classrooms rather than separating, except in extreme cases. But yeah, so Italy, Portugal, and Norway and Finland are really good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Rachel? Sorry,
Okay.
Rachel Vaughn from ESPD.
I was going to ask, what would you recommend to someone who's a teacher wanting to take a first step into implementing UDL, UDE in their classroom?
I think the very first step is really taking that whole systems approach. And I'm aware I sound like a broken record, but I think it's just it's a real mental shift in how you look at it. And then once you start looking outside of the classroom, you think more of that student journey. So almost like a service design approach, you're looking at how, if that student had breakfast that morning, and how that might affect their learning and their engagement and their ultimate success in education and afterwards. So it's really looking at the whole system as much as possible. And that's the first step, I think, just getting that shift in thinking. The next, I think the resources that I mentioned here are really good starting points. The customer communications toolkit is eye-opening, I think. It's really like a lot of it is things you might already be doing, but there's also it has really good examples of of different things, different ways to make your documents and teaching more accessible. So these kind of really practical tips. And also remembering to co-design. So thinking of education as a collaborative thing, so that you're working with the students to design their education as well.
Right. We have one more question from Georgios. Do you want to ask the question? Okay. Okay, I can just read it out, no problem. Very detailed presentation. Did LMS really help deaf students participate in lessons, and did you face any problems?
I've never used it myself in that specific instance, so I can't speak to that personally. But I know that that there are, LMS, that it is a consideration that you need to take, not just with LMSs, but in all, in Zoom as well. So I've heard anecdotal evidence of it being used, but I can't speak to it personally.
I think we don't have any more questions in the chat. Anyone else has anything to add, ask? We still have some time.
If there are no more questions, or while you're thinking as well, I can just do a quick recap, or as quick as can be possible. Just some key takeaways. So the first is to ensure that content is accessible to all. Again, just regardless of their age, size, ability, or disability. And then try to follow as many of the 7 principles of universal design as possible. And also looking at that whole system, so including the whole educational environment, that whole person. Consider also the different levels or the layers, so they are the micro, meso, and macro. And also taking into account those 4 pillars of UDE, so those 4 pillars being learning and assessment, supports and their social engagement as well, and also the physical and digital environments. And then finally, following good practice guidance for teaching, collaboration, and clear communication online. And you could have a look at the web accessibility techniques on our website, also the customer communications toolkit, and in particular for this session, the digital communication section of that toolkit. And also take a look at the Participation Matters for guidelines on collaboration with disabled learners. In a nutshell.
Thank you, Rachel. I believe we don't have any more questions, so maybe we can close. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm sure everyone has something to take away from this, even though there are experts here in inclusive education, in UDL, but I still feel that we've learned something today. And as for slightly more logistical things, we will share the PPT and whatever extra links, Rachel, you want to share, I can share them after. And thank you so much. This is probably our last webinar for the ADEDU project this year. We will have a few more next year, but that's next year. So we will keep you updated. And thank you so much, everyone, for participating. And have a nice rest of the day. Bye.
Great, thank you.